on my side? Okay, I do. Awesome. So first off, I'm Toast, everybody. It's wonderful to meet you.
Toast.
Before I get started with kind of what I wanted to talk about, I wanted to jump in and show you guys what my company is doing right now, so you can get an idea of like what we do. So that's what I wanted to do first. So I'm gonna jump over here with the video player and show you the trailer for our upcoming game. This is our first trailer. It's actually gotten a much improved from here.
Ooh.
Ambassador's letterhead. Good use handwriting analysis.
I try to keep it away from the staff, but you know how things get leaked out.
You realise you can't pay to make the nightmares go away.
Been here before, Inspector.
When it was Supply Depot, not Luxury Hotel. Looks like the Galaxy's sweetheart throws death threats around and she's mad.
2 injured. The hotel's maintenance officer and the administrator.
War might be over, but the fighting's hardly finished.
So that's the trailer for the Callisto, which is our upcoming, it's an escape room murder mystery game. And there's a couple of reasons why I wanted to show this trailer to you, not just because I wanted to brag about, look at what I'm doing, but because there's a couple really neat things about level design that are really important in this game. And I want to talk a lot about level design, some of the obstacles that I face in level design that I have learned over a long period of building games. Just so as you know, this is me. Hi, this is what I look like in real life. I look like a trip and a mess and stuff. I am the CEO of Gib Games. We're a company based out of Delaware. We have like employees and a board and all kinds of stuff like that. It's crazy. I do so much paperwork. It's not even you know. I have been developing game content for 15 years. I started with building mods. I did stuff with Source Engine. I have worked with the Elder Scrolls engine when they came out with Morrowind. Some of you may not remember Morrowind, but it came out with it was one of the first games that came out with the full constructor set of the entire game and its content for people to be able to build entire overhauls of the game on their own. And I played around with that a whole lot. I moved into doing that more professionally within the last 5-6 years. I specialize in environment and level design. My like really niche specialty is lighting. That is like one of my favorite things to do and talk about. I could give a whole presentation on lighting. I had to limit myself to like one slide on lighting because otherwise I would have gone forever. And I mentioned here, as I mentioned, I geek out environmental lighting. I geek out about it.
Me too.
Yeah, that'll be another day. I could talk about lighting all day. I do often. It actually makes my employees really like frustrated because they're like, we don't want to talk about lighting. We want to talk about something else.
Do it.
So this is Gib Games. We started up in 2021. We are an entirely virtual company, and as Bagel had mentioned, many companies are looking at doing the remote thing, and we decided to take that a step further. We don't have an office. We are all entirely virtual. We have a mailbox that serves as our headquarters, and the coolest thing with that is that I get to hire people from anywhere in the world. I get to hire the best people for the job rather than the best people within 50 miles of where I happen to be residing. And we find that works really well with us. It saves us a bunch of money on a building, for sure, but also people get to work in the comfort of their own homes with tools that they're already familiar with. It works out really great. We're entirely VR focused. We want to make VR games and VR games only. I mean, AR sort of is tangential, adjacent to that, and is kind of grouped in, but generally we are VR focused. And as was mentioned, I started with VR design for virtual environment commissions, mostly VR chat. I did a little bit like Rec Room, a couple other ones, but mostly it was VR chat. And I'll talk about some of the worlds that I made and how I apply some of the level design key concepts I'm going to talk about today. We build both for businesses and for consumers. So we've got the Callisto is what we're building as a game, but we've also worked with companies to build things like showrooms, and I'll talk about that a little bit as well. So That's a little bit about us. Let's talk about what I want to talk about here today. I'm going to start here with this button, if it'll let me click it. So this was when I was first building for VR. I decided to go big or go home, and one of the things I wanted to do is I wanted to build an escape room that you could have to escape out of 3 or 4 different rooms and do a whole bunch of different things. And I ran into a problem. I had a key that was poised on this really cool looking bar, and the door was right over there, and it seemed really simple to me. All you had to do was grab the key, take it to the lock, and it would trigger the animation and the door would open. Problem solved. If you really wanted to be froggy, you could just like climb through the window because I hadn't gotten the colliders to work properly. But you know what? I was just worrying about the key. What I discovered was that this key right here was not being discovered. There were a large number of users that couldn't find the key, and they were getting stuck when they were testing out the escape room. And the reason why is because you see right here on the right-hand side, this is what the key looked like to me when I was in game. I'm like, it's right there. It's blue. It's got an emissive texture on it. It's sitting on something that's brown. How can you possibly miss that? And finally, when I was going through it, it suddenly hit me. Yeah, this is what it looked like to me.
Yeah.
But this is what it looked like to somebody with an avatar shorter than me. They couldn't possibly see that key. And when I say shorter than me, I'm saying the difference, an avatar this tall could not see the key that to me looked like that. And this brings up some of the key concepts that I want to talk about today. They are visible, accessible elements in level design, navigable spaces, and intuitive interactables. These are the 3 key elements that I use when I'm developing a level for VR that are fundamentally different from building on a flat screen. By a show of hands, has anyone here done game development not for non-VR? Anyone here? Show of hands, anyone at all? Cool, awesome, we got a couple people here. There are certain level design concepts that apply both flat screen and VR gaming. I say flat screen gaming a lot. I know that that's not really the term, but it's kind of like what I've coined at this point. Flat screen development versus VR development. But there are certain things that are actually relatively specific to VR. Some of these things I picked up through trial and error. Some of them I've picked up through podcasts. If you get an opportunity to listen to podcasts, some of the ones from Half-Life Alyx and some of their level designers were actually really interesting to me because they've done a lot of research in how users interact with VR. And they've been able to do a lot of stuff and share a lot of that knowledge that game developers for VR, like me and my team, get to use. And I get to share some of that knowledge with you as well today. So, visible, accessible elements. Getting back to this key here. Your player should be able to see and interact with the world regardless of height. It seems like a small thing, but honestly, I have discovered that building something that is visible or is interactable from all heights, from everywhere from here to all the way to your teeny tiny characters, is actually really, really difficult. The general rule of thumb in a game like VR Chat, and a lot of people develop in VR Chat, is about here. And by the way, this is a standard VR Chat size avatar that I'm standing in right now. So from about here, about 6 inches above standard height to about waist height, should be able to interact with anything. The idea with that, and this is kind of a best practice in VR Chat that me and several other level designers say, is if your avatar is much taller than 6 inches higher than here, or much shorter than 6 inches lower than here, you're considered a novelty height avatar. Is that something that the VR Chat developers use? No, not at all. But when you're doing level design, you say, this is the range that we're going to develop for, and that makes it a lot easier to predict user behavior. Because we've seen little teeny tiny avatars, actually there's like 1 or 2 of them in here, and that's okay. But as I'm no doubt aware, when you get to a certain height, certain level of smallness, things become difficult for you to interact with. And that's okay. That's why they make, avatars that grow and shrink and do funky things. I mean, I've got a teeny tiny avatar that's about this tall that I occasionally do things with, but I know how difficult that is. So we've kind of set a standard of about to here. Don't rely on yourself as a template. In VR Chat, it's super easy to test. If I want to do this and I'm sitting here and I want to test a different world, all I got to do is pop open my avatar here. I can be like, now all of a sudden I can test my world in a slightly different avatar. And I get a little bit of a different view, what I want to do. Hi, look, I'm a crewmate. But when you're developing outside of VR chat, where changing avatars is not super easy, it's actually much more difficult. What we had to do was on our player controller. We had a player controller that has the standard camera. That is where we say this is what it's going to be like for our developer's height. We're all kind of around the same height except one dude that's a little taller. And we have a debug function that lets us take the camera and make it a little bit smaller than us and a little bit taller than us. It actually goes to about that height. Developing outside of VR chat is a lot easier because usually you won't have really small people that are playing, but you might have people that are playing from a chair if you have sitting down function. You might have people that are really, really tall. Do you know that Shaq owns an index? Yeah, I have to build for Shaq. What am I going to do? I'm actually thinking that I might have a hallway that's like right below Shaq's eye level, so that if he ever plays it, it just has a little thing that says "Hi Shaq." Oops, did this change out of PowerPoint? It did. Sorry. So make sure things are within reach. We'll talk a little bit about reach and grabbing on objects, but things like light switches, things like interactables, they should be within reach. What's really interesting is, and I highly recommend looking at this, maybe I'm just a nerd, there are certain standards on where lights and handles on doors should be in an actual building when it is being built. Usually they are 1.5 meters from the floor, and they are usually 1.5 meter from the doorway for light switches. And actually, when you put that in there, it becomes very intuitive for people to know where light switches are. That kind of height is just perfect for pretty much everybody. And applying some of those architectural designs really works really well in VR. Keep audio and visual user differences in mind. I'll talk a little bit about accessibility later, but it is always important to remember that your users may have various types of color blindness. They may have disabilities. They may be deaf. They may have one arm. There are many different things that you should keep in mind when you're building. I will talk about accessibility specifically later, but when you're building, just think about how your users may be different from you and how their experience may be different from yours. Navigable spaces. This is a room that's from Callisto. It's a really big open bar room. Talk about navigable spaces. When I say a navigable space, I'm talking about a space that you can move through without instruction. Anyone ever played a game, VR games particularly, ever played a game where you enter a room in a VR game and it is not immediately apparent where you should go and you have to kind of look for it? Where it's like, is this the right way? What's interesting is there's sometimes when you'll want to do that, but for the most part, you don't. You want your players to know exactly where they want to go. In VR chat, it's really great to have people explore, and in VR games outside of VR chat, it often is as well. But for the most part, a game has a progression that a player needs to be able to know where they're going to be moving. And so what you want to do is make a room navigable. You want to have the design of the floor so that the player knows where to go. You want to have the walls and the lights and the doors, wherever the player goes, be somewhere that you want to go. Who here has played Murder 4 by Jar? Come on, there we go. There's all the hands. I was hoping I would ask at least one question that everybody was like, yeah, I have. If you get a chance, open up an instance of Murder 4 by yourself, and if you've got those elite hacks that you can walk around and do that without having friends there. Otherwise, invite some friends and look around. Look at the way that Jar designs the space of Murder 4. It is a large, sprawling mansion, but you can navigate your way around Murder 4 very intuitively. Brand new players can walk through that mansion and know where they're going. Part of it is because the doors are very well lit. Part of it is because the floor is really well designed with straight lines that guide you pretty much subconsciously. Murder 4 is, in my opinion, one of the best designed pieces of area in general in VR chat. What was interesting was I was looking around, even the world we're in right now. I'm going to walk over here really quick. This gray carpet spans all the way around, it loops around, and if you follow it, that gray carpet will lead you to everywhere in this world. It's because this world is meant to be explored. And that gray carpet immediately tells you whether you are moving from kind of a public space to a slightly not so public space. Those kinds of visual cues are incredibly important for a player understanding what they're supposed to do. If you have someone that comes down this gray carpet and they come up to this door and they see everybody sitting in here, The cue of the fact that they are walking off that gray carpet onto tile is actually a stronger visual note to them. This is a semi-private space than the fact that it is a room full of people that are watching someone talking. Believe it or not. That kind of thing will give them more pause and have them probably be more likely to very carefully or cautiously enter a room than they would if the entire floor was covered in carpet. I don't know who designed this world, by the way. I was looking around. It looks very well designed, just from a level design standpoint. This is my first time being here. I just wanted to mention to whoever has that as a level designer, this room, this world is very well laid out. When we need wide open spaces. So Gib Games did some work with Hyundai Motor Group here in VR chat. We were to create a showroom for them. We wanted to showcase some of Hyundai's cars, some of their technology, let people interact. In Korea, South Korea, which is where Hyundai Motor Group is based, there is a big thing with the metaverse. The idea that people can interact. And to be more specific, by the way, we were working with Hyundai Motor Group University, which is their kind of learning management team for their company. So people that are learning, new employees that are learning about Hyundai, learning about how to sell things and do stuff, they work with Hyundai Motor Group University, and those are the people that work with us. This one over here is based on a Genesis Expo, like an expo booth that they had at an actual convention, an actual major auto convention. We were showcasing cars with different colors. Hard to see, it's kind of faded out here, but we had like a control panel that lets you change the car's colors. We had a flying car because every company has a flying car. A couple of interesting things to point out here. On the floor, there is a carpet that navigates people from part of the showroom to part of the showroom very easily. Without that carpet, people weren't sure where to go first. They were kind of getting a little bit overwhelmed, particularly new players. So we added a single carpet. It's just literally one cube that's stretched out and has got a carpet texture on it. And immediately that was not a complaint anymore. People knew where they were supposed to go. They kind of took all of the exhibits in order from the front to the end, and it worked out really well. Those kinds of details are really important. Areas become much more accessible with space is really important as well. You notice that the hallways here in this world are really wide hallways, probably wider than you would see in an office space in the real world. Part of this is because as people, we have a psychological bubble that we don't like people to come into. That bubble has expanded more with pandemic. I've noticed that even after places have lifted restrictions on pandemic, people's personal bubble is still quite large. In VR, that bubble is actually a little bit larger than you would normally have. And part of that is because of the differential, there's a word I'm looking for, there's a disconnect between the visuals and the actual space that you are. And because of that, it makes your safety and security bubble a little bit wider. I have a theory that that's partly related to your guardian zone, because I have found out that people that have their guardian zones disabled, like people that tend to do VR like standing in one spot, have a much closer bubble than people that have a set up guardian zone. And I think part of that is a visual thing. Because of that, and people have that really big bubble, building open spaces makes people much more comfortable in a world, particularly when you have newbies. People are more willing to interact with each other if they are in a space where they can have that kind of really close conversations. Bagel, can I borrow you for a minute? Do you mind if I borrow you for a minute, Bagel? Just right up here. If you're in the middle of something, that's okay. I know it's unexpected.
Give me a second. Sorry, I was not being expected to be called on in class. What was that, Dork? I'm so sorry.
No, that's totally okay. We're talking about some personal space. Is it okay if I get into your virtual personal space for just a second?
That's fine.
Do you mind?
Yeah.
Okay. So if I get in here, it actually feels very strange, even though in real life I might be having a conversation with you and be this close. Maybe if we were in a club or we were in, I mean, even in an office space that was a little bit more compressed, this would be comfortable. But does it seem uncomfortable to you to have my avatar this close to you right now?
Yeah, a little bit.
A little bit. This is much more comfortable, and you'll see people have kind of more of an arm's length. That's why having open spaces that people can interact with makes it much more comfortable to interact with each other. I appreciate it. Thank you for your participation in class. You get an A.
No problem.
You get a gold star for the day.
Thank you.
If you just sit in and you watch someone in any of the many clubs in VR chat, you'll see that a lot. People will be about arm's length apart. Well-designed clubs will have couches that have spaces in between them, even though on our couch in real life you might be pressed up against somebody. That kind of stuff is important for player comfort. And I have seen clubs that have dropped on community labs that didn't follow these and maybe had some really close compressed areas that were really empty because people would come in there, they would feel claustrophobic with people around, and they would leave. You can also use this open space to showcase the grandiosity of your world. It's hard to tell here, but this gray carpet here is about arm's length wide. So this showcase room is really, really big. It was built to be about 40 to 50 feet tall so that it could be very grand, so that these people could come in, take a look at this showroom and say, I am in a gigantic showroom. This is amazing. And that is something that's really great to show off to new people. It's why one of the most popular things that people do the first time that they download anything for Oculus is to download Oculus's Google Earth, because they can see that grandiosity of the world. I know it was probably the second thing I tried in VR ever was Google Earth. It brings greater attention to your interactable elements. And for new players, this is important. New players, sometimes they don't know how much they can interact with. And being able to showcase when something is important for them to look at is something that you can do with that space by setting those interactable pieces apart. Wide open spaces are incredibly, incredibly effective when you're dealing with people that are new to VR. Then sometimes you want to ignore everything that was on the last slide. Can anybody tell me what this program is? Anyone know?
Hammer.
Hammer.
It sure is. That is Hammer 2. And this right here is Half-Life Alyx. This is from... Good, gold star for you, Trivi. This is from Half-Life Alyx. I'm going to talk about Half-Life Alyx a bit because it is definitely a gold star in level design. This is an area in Half-Life Alyx. It's the distillery, if you've ever played it. Before you get to enter the distillery and before you encounter Jeff, if you don't know who Jeff is and you don't want to be spoiled, I'm not going to tell you. But before you encounter Jeff for the first time, you have to go through a kind of a small tunnel, and the other character is on your headset talking to you, and you have to climb up this really constricting ladder area, and then you meet Larry, this guy who's another character and is human like you, and talks to you for a couple of minutes while you're sort of just coming out of this area. There's a really important reason why they do that, because constricting spaces create tension. They make the player feel very defensive. If you've ever played an adventure game, and I'm talking flat screen too, if you want a player to feel like they're a little claustrophobic or like they're a little on edge and you want to slow them down, you make a constricting space. It is so much more powerful in VR, though. There's a really great moment in Half-Life Alyx where you are about to meet the Vortigaunts for the first time, and there's weird magical shit happening. Weird magical stuff happening. I apologize. And right before that scene, you go through a kind of a constricting hallway with a bright light that's right in your face. And every single YouTuber I've ever seen that did a playthrough of Half-Life Alyx for the first time, they stop in that room. They're moving along, jauntily, come into this room. They may like shoot a zombie, shoot a head crab. No, I'm just moving on. And they come to this room and they stop dead. And they move slowly as they go on through this constricting space. It creates really great tension. In VR chat, it's not necessarily something that you would use a lot. Maybe if you were building a horror-based map. But in general level design, particularly for VR, those constricting spaces make the player feel very defensive. I showed the trailer earlier, and there's a part where I'm climbing up a ladder. The main characters climb up a ladder. That ladder is in a very constricting space, and that ladder leads to a very open space after it where you can kind of look out and see the entire Hotel Callisto spread out before you. That's because the reason why I want to do that is two reasons. One, I want them to feel a little bit extra careful and a little bit like on edge. What am I going to find? It makes that idea of finding and discovering that view feel like a relief. It makes the player feel good. It releases endorphins. It's the same reason why people watch horror movies, because they like to get scared. That getting scared and getting defensive comes as a relief when you realize that there's no real danger. It's kind of what makes horror movies very addicting. And you can, I don't want to say exploit that, but really it's what you're doing, is you exploit that as a level designer, where after that constricting space, you create kind of an open area after it. That's why you don't want to string many of these areas together. You create an open area after it, and all of a sudden, the player is feeling better that they moved through that part, and they want to continue on. It's a reward that they can then pursue continually. It also means that they're going to feel less defensive going through a constricting space in the future, which means that you're helping your player be able to navigate more and more dangerous situations, or more and more intense situations. You also don't want to use them when you want the player to relax right then and there. You want to use them just before that. The place where you want them to relax and explore and chill out and have a good time and, oh, what's this? What are all these objects? Is if you want to have them really sit and relax and explore, you put a constricting area right before that, which the area with Jeff, despite it being intense, is actually a relatively relaxing level to go through. The reason being that you can sit in one spot. I got people over there shaking their head. No, it's not at all. I completely understand. But when you think about it, when you find a spot in Jeff where you're safe, where you can't be seen or heard or smelled, you actually feel very relieved. You're like, okay, I'm safe here for a minute. Now what do I do? And you'll find that many of the rooms in Jeff are each linked with a constricting space. I wish I had a picture of one here, but the one I can think of is that when you pass through, there's an old server room, and a head crab knocks off some stuff, and Jeff comes running after you. You have to crawl through an old server and climb over some boxes and go behind a wall. And right after you go behind that wall and sneak through that little space, there's a big open space where Jeff can't get you. And you get to look around and explore. There's a big plug in the ground that leads to the next area, all kinds of stuff. That open feeling lets the player know it's safe here. You can look around, relax, and explore. And then the player will do that. And you don't have to tell them that. They'll do it by instinct. This is also Half-Life Alyx, as I mentioned. Lighting counts. This is my one lighting slide, guys. Lighting counts. So, has anyone here not played Half-Life Alyx? I'll call on someone that has not played Half-Life Alyx. Bagel has not played Half-Life Alyx. Why? Okay, Bagel, can you come up here real quick and tell me where the exit to this room is? Like, it is. I'm possibly looking back from where I came, or I'm looking forward. The exit could be over on the left. It could be over on the right. It could be behind the camera. Or it could be in front of the camera. Where do you think the exit to the room is? If you were to just guess.
It's just like, it looks like it's just like right there, right, with the broken door.
Right here with the broken door? You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
Absolutely right. 100%. Thank you very much.
Hey.
I appreciate it. Second gold star. There's a couple reasons. And
so many gold stars.
The fact that it's in the center of the screen is actually unrelated to this. The things that tell you that this is the exit is there's a light right here that lights the door. There's light coming out of the door. And all of the light sources in the room are pointed towards the player. It casts everything else in the room, the backside of it, in a dark shadow. It is a very stark visual cue that players will always listen to. You can tell, and Valve talks about how their playtesters do things. We could guess 95% of the time what they would do. This is a great example of it. Every single player that I've seen that do Half-Life Alyx, and I've watched many of them, I've taken so many notes. They know exactly where they're going here. They'll interact with something here, they'll interact with something here, but they already know that's where they're going. This spot right over here is where they're going to go to at the end of this. And I'll mention, dang it, I keep on hitting something here. I'll mention, this area that you can explore comes right after a kind of a constricting space. You've got to crouch down and move through this fungus little area through a kind of a constricting doorway, and then it opens here. And the player gets to explore, look around, pick up things, there's a little conversation, and then they get to move on. So this is a great example of that. Speaking of the things you can interact interact with. Can anybody tell me there is one thing on this desk that you cannot interact with? Anybody tell me what it is? If you were to guess. Feel free to shout it out.
The ashtray.
The ashtray? You're thinking the ashtray? Eh? Anybody else?
Yeah.
Yeah? What are you thinking?
The typewriter?
This thing here? This thing right here?
No, to the left.
This
of
thing
it.
right here? This thing right here?
Yeah.
There's the ashtray, okay.
Yeah.
It's actually this right here. This right here. You
Yeah.
cannot interact with. You can't pick it up. I mean, you can grab it, but you can't really pick it up and move it. At least at the time that I created this, that maybe they're always making updates and changes.
It does have a different look.
You'll notice that this object is not brightly colored. It is not as reflective. It does not have that kind of metallic shader on it. It gives that visual idea that you can't really pick this up. And most players that come in here, they won't even try to. The ashtray does give off that same kind of an idea, but the ashtray is also really kind of the more boring interactables. So the ashtray could just as easily have not been interactable, just kind of the way that it was made. There are some props in Half-Life Alyx I think were not originally meant to be interactable, and then at some point they said, no, we should just make as much as you can, pick up everything. The ashtray is one of them, because it's built that same way. I wanted to mention the ring or highlight question, and this is one that pops up a lot. VR chat, obviously, if you pick up an object, you know when you go over to it, it lights up and gets that kind of blue outline that lets you grab it. I know that I just did that, and I can see the blue outline, but none of you can. I don't know why I did that. But you guys have probably played other VR games where it uses a little ring, that when you pick it up, the ring either gets bigger or changes color. Blade and Sorcery uses that one, if you've played Blade and Sorcery. Handful of other games, objects are defined by being pick-upable by having a little UI ring that sits on it. Some games say we should make the ring the standard. Did I go back? Did I move backwards back? I did. We should make the ring kind of the standard. I personally like the highlight. I think the highlight is less intrusive, less immersion breaking than floating UI. VR chat uses it. Half-Life Alyx uses it. And to me, I think that the idea that I can just reach over and have a very subtle visual idea that I can touch something or I can interact with something is a little bit more of a visually blending idea than being across the room and seeing a big white circle over there and be like, oh, there's something over there I can pick up. To me, it feels much more intuitive to have highlighting, much more immersive to have highlighting. But there's going to be developers that say the other one. I figure one of those two will probably end up winning out. One of the things we were playing with in Callisto was being able to swap between the two, where in the options you could swap between ring highlight and regular highlight. Don't know if we're going to do that. This is something we were talking about. How do you make interactables and pickups more obvious? A couple ones. Color. Bright colors make things more interactable. Things being shiny. Basically, bright colors and shininess. That's really the two things that you need to make something really interactable. It can be one, the other, or both. This laser pointer is actually really great because it's a really bright blue. You know where it is. If it gets stuck behind an object or whatever, you can kind of see it pretty easily. It makes interactables like that work really well. The next time you're just doing some world hopping and you drop into some of the more popular interactables rooms, take a look at which objects you can pick up and which ones you can't. Taking some note of that will give you an idea of how these kinds of key elements get implemented in VR. You're playing your favorite VR games. Think about those. I'm trying to think of a couple of ones that use the ring. Blade and Sorcery does. Boneworks does use the ring as well. I know that the VR interaction framework for Unity, which is very commonly used, is actually the one that Callisto uses for our VR framework. Uses the ring by default. You can get it to use the highlighter. One of the trade-offs with using a highlight is that it does create more draw calls, which means that it could be a way that you would need to optimize if you're trying to build really optimized. Something that I have seen people talk about is to use the ring for really optimized things like Quest, and then use highlighter for non-optimized versions. And that's okay too. I'm curious to see which one will kind of become the, go-to. I'm not sure if you're like raising your hand by Bagel or if you're just like doing stuff over there, which is okay. I think Bagel's just doing stuff. Okay. That's cool. I wish I could push this. This is something that I heard from some of my playtesters when they were looking at this panel. The reason why is because this panel looks incredibly dynamic. Like, you should be able to switch every switch, flip every knob, push every button, and you can't. Not right now. That's one of the things that we're fixing. Because this panel just looks so bright and dynamic, it looks so inviting. I want to grab it and have it go click, 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 and get that, you know, air-popping kind of sensation. You know which one is like packing bubbles kind of sensation. And what's neat is I did a test with one. I just grabbed one of these random knobs. I stuck it onto a thing. I made it so that you could grab it and have it go click. Man, I was sitting on this thing for like 5 minutes going click, 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 click. And someone's like, what are you doing? And I'm like, oh yeah, I'm just turning this thing. It's really satisfying to turn. Click, 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 click. You want to avoid having things that look like you should be able to grab up.
Video chat.
What's that?
Oh, Unity 2019
I was trying to be quiet.
dropped.
Yeah.
Big update.
Oh no, it's on. You know what new VR chat update just happened?
Yeah, Unity 2019.
Everything's gonna break. Great. Everything's gonna drop.
Woohoo.
Fantastic.
Yay.
Don't reload anything.
Bring out the champagne.
You pop out the champagne. This kind of thing, you want to. Now, there's kind of two ways you could approach this. If you've got something that looks very much like someone wants to touch it, how do you fix that? You could either make it so that they can touch it, which is what we're doing. We're going to make it interactable, or you could change the panel. You could dull it down. You know, maybe make everything one material so that it looks kind of more like the background than the foreground. I think that everything should be interactable. The more things you can make interactable, the better. In VR, people like picking things up. They like opening and closing cabinets. They like opening and closing drawers. The more you can pick up and interact with, the better. I'm going to talk a little bit about how I use some of these key elements in stuff in VR chat. The most popular world that I made is the Udon courtroom. You may have put your friends on trial there, or tase them and send them to jail. There's a couple of things I wanted to touch on this and why this was such a successful VR chat world. The Golden Gavel for patrons was kind of a really cool way to get people to get involved and see something interesting. And, you know, JAR does that as well, stuff for patrons. And then things like the taser in jail made it interactive for people to, you know, annoy their friends, which everyone likes annoying their friends in VR chat. The sync timers was a cool way to add something that was realism and add a little bit of extra order to the room. I'm going to talk about what we can learn from Udon and the Udon courtroom. Has anyone here ever built anything using Udon?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Memory management is one of the things that we can learn from Udon because you have a very limited amount of things that you can have in your memory. You've got a very limited types of variables you can send. If you've built with Udon, you probably know the stress of how am I going to send this number across when I can only send a string? How do I synchronize a string? That should be so easy, and you have to go through 6 different steps to do it. Variable handling and the way that it's done in multiplayer is really complex. When VR chat was first built, I think that to some extent, the idea that non-developers, non-VR chat developers, would be actually directly accessing some of these variables that are sent across was not initially on their mind, and they didn't make that framework easily accessible, which is why now it's a little bit difficult. We don't think about it a lot in VR chat, but there are a lot of variables that get sent every single frame of this game. Something as simple as where my hand is at any given time has to be sent synchronously to everyone in this room that can see where my hand is, and then translate that into the skeleton of my hand as it is being rendered on your headset. Sometimes we forget that to some extent we are all playing a single-player game when we play VR chat. We are playing an instance of a game, and that your voice, and if we're talking about mine, your voice and your avatar has been downloaded to my computer, and the skeleton position and your avatar information and your voice is being updated on my side. The game is recording your voice when you talk and is playing it back on my PC. So those kinds of variables and the number of those variables is really, really gross and disgusting. How do you manage that when you're doing something like a world? You have to incredibly limit it. That's why you can only send limited strings. You can only send limited variables. as of one of the most recent updates, you can send things like bools and arrays now, which you weren't initially able to do. It's because VR chat developers on the back end have to change the way that those variables are accessible to everybody else. Performance is very important. When you are building for VR chat, you guys, I'm sure you know that there are limits on things like polys in your world, things like particles in your world. Building when you're making an avatar, you've got very strict poly limits. You've got very strict poly limits. It's okay. You got very strict poly limits that people violate all the time. If we're being honest. Checks, balances, and limits are actually really important in this, though. If you, has anyone here ever opened up the debug panel, like to watch the console in VR chat? Yeah, a couple people. Does anyone other than me do that for fun, or is that just me? I might just be a nerd. I did that a lot when I was. Pain. Yeah, exactly. It's just like it's great when it just pops up right in front of your eyes and you can't move it. I love that. But when you look at it, if you pop it open, it actually gives you some really cool information that you can utilize. I'm actually gonna, just for S's and G's here really quick, I'm gonna open this here. Okay, so the kind of information that I've got on this panel here is whenever someone joins, it's dropping join information. Whenever someone moves, it's dropping avatar information. I'm seeing this console is giving me information about some of the variables in the world. If I was to pick up this object, it's going to tell me the object ownership has changed. That information is being sent to everybody in the room so that they all know that the ownership of this object has changed. And then the object's position is being updated every frame. Every fixed update, this object's position gets updated back and forth. Just me holding this laser pointer is a gross amount of information that's being sent. And you guys can see that information in your console. That kind of stuff and how that is managed, all those checks, balances, and limits are all there in your console. A lot of them you will see when the editor or console yells at you. When someone joins, and I mentioned earlier, people violate poly and particle limits on their avatars all the time. They kind of push those boundaries. If someone joins or is in a world that is passing one of those limits, a lot of the times you will see errors pop up in your console. And it's not going to prevent the person from doing that, but it's going to be yelling at you and being like, hey, there is an avatar that may be a problem. And that way, if there are logs that have to pop up, if someone was to have a crasher, all of that stuff gets outputted to a log. If you have ever reported someone with a crasher avatar, which I've done a couple of times, I report them before. If someone crashes you with a crasher avatar, you can open up your log and you can look at those last handful of lines and it'll tell you exactly where those errors are coming from and you can get that person's information. VRChat puts that in there in order to have that information accessible to its players in order to protect its players. How do you apply that in your game? Making sure that you have a console stuff that yells at you when it does something wrong. In Callisto, right now I've got a thing where I have these objects that are clues. When I pick them up, it updates stuff. It'll update whether or not I've picked up the object, and it's already in my notebook, whether or not I have already gotten information, whether or not it's already triggered a piece of dialogue. If I pick up an object and something has already been triggered that is not supposed to have been triggered in some way, the console will yell at me and it will output it into a console. I learned from VRChat and made my console a physical object so I can turn it on and it looks like I'm holding a screen in Callisto and I can just scroll through my console, which is much more accessible. But I can then look at that and it'll have in big red letters. And usually what I do is it'll have the name of the object, the message, and then like a code. So if let's say I pick up a cup and that cup has a dialogue piece that if you've never picked up the cup before, it'll play a dialogue. I pick up the cup that I've never picked up before and it checks and it says the dialogue has already been played. Clearly that's a problem. So it's going to output, it's going to say clue cup number 1 says tried to fire dialogue that was already fired, and it'll have a little key code. Having that information for you will save you so much time, because if you start having problems, if you start picking up this cup and it's not firing the dialogue and you don't know why, you can look at the code, you can look at your console log, see where that data is. Eventually you can get rid of a lot of these once you start fixing things, or you can start disabling them in your code. But having this stuff that yells at you when objects acted with a behavior they shouldn't have, that's important. You can do it in VRChat too. If I'm in Udon Courtroom and I pick up this gavel here, and actually I use myself as a tester on it. So if you're a patron and you pick up the gavel, it turns gold. If I pick up the gavel, I am not on the patron list, right? In the world. If it turns gold and I have picked it up, it will drop something into the VR chat console that I can read that says that something attempted to fire the network event for turning gold, and this is what stopped it. It has saved me so much time in VR chat development. Instead of having to spend hours figuring out why something isn't working, I can look at the console. It seems like something that most developers know, log stuff a lot, but sometimes you don't realize how often you're not putting in logs and you're not catching things that you should potentially be wanting to catch. Think about states that objects could potentially be in that they shouldn't be in. Sometimes we think it'll only be in state C once A and B have happened. What happens if that object is in state C, but one of those two have not? Having those kinds of things are important. What makes Udon Courtroom fun? So we're going to talk. This is just really recapping what I've really been talking about. Intuitive interactables. There's over 40 different pieces of evidence that you can pick up, like all this nonsense evidence over here. Like, the United Bank of Money. If you like Auntie Donna, here's your cowboy reference. All kinds of stuff you can pick up, interact with, move around in the world. You can totally do this. Navigable spaces. The hallways are double wide. The courtroom itself is really big. You can move around in it. All the doorways are really big. Oops, that's my fireplace that I just hit with my hand. Navigable spaces, right? Doorways are taller than normal, wider than normal. Accessible elements. It pushes the envelope of immersion. We talk about whether or not you're being immersed by your UI. VR chat tends to use the buttons and floating text option. That's why we all have names floating above our heads unless we've disabled that. If we use that kind of standard in VR chat, that's used in Udon Courtroom. There's a lot of buttons that are floating in the world that you can interact with to do various things, and it makes them incredibly intuitive because my target player in Udon Courtroom is a VR chat player. So I don't want to build a world that uses less visible interactivity. I don't want to go against VR chat standard because that's the platform that I'm building for. So I just want to touch on two more things here before I wrap up that are really great for level design for VR. One of them is optimize everything. Sometimes we think that when we're building for VR that we have to really, really limit ourselves graphically. Now, are you going to be able to build like Battlefield 4 level graphics in VR? Probably not so easily. You're going to have to sacrifice. But it doesn't mean that you have to really give it up entirely. You saw Callisto. You saw how pretty that looks. A lot of those textures, they look like this. This is a texture that does a couple of different things. There's a shader on it that reads the red, the green, and the blue, and the alpha channel all together. And so whereas you're familiar with Unity, you might have an albedo layer, and a metallic layer, and a specular layer, and an occlusion layer, and all these different textures. This is one texture. And then it's got a slider of color that I can have many different instances of this one texture. And it optimizes the entire world. I could look down a hallway, and everything in that hallway uses a variant of one texture right here. So like the red is kind of a dirt layer. The green is the metallic, and it expands the metallic in and out. The yellow that's on it is your standard albedo, and then you see kind of this crosshatch pattern. That's the alpha channel for if I use this texture for glass. It creates these little like marks in the glass. This is one shader and one texture that is able to be utilized over and over again, and it makes the design very, very highly optimized. I get really high frame rates when I'm running Callisto. I get high frame rates in editor, which is sometimes hard to do. You can optimize. Sometimes you got to use some serious trickery. There's I don't have a video that I could show you on it, but it's kind of neat. We do a thing with these doors. There's doors in Callisto that are glass doors that have kind of a frosted effect. And they have that frosted effect because they have a reflection probe that's on it. You guys familiar with what a reflection probe is? Yeah. has a reflection probe on it that I overrode the reflection probe with a texture of the other side of that door. So if I'm approaching the door, it looks like I'm seeing through to the other side, but in reality, I'm seeing a reflection probe, and the door is metallic. And what that does is two things. One, people can see the room on the other side before it's actually loaded. And two, I'm optimizing how many things are being loaded at one time. So instead of loading the next room and this room and maybe stuff beyond, I can be in this room and be 10 feet from the door and have only this room loaded. It makes it it makes stuff run really, really nicely. And those kinds of tricks, they're not so useful in VR chat, but outside of VR chat and general VR development, those kinds of tricks are really, really useful. Accessibility is something that I really care a whole lot about. When I founded Gib Games, I wanted to focus a lot on making games that are accessible. There are only 2 VR games that I know of that have a one-handed mode. One of them is VR chat. Anyone know what the other one is?
Alex.
Alex.
Half-Life Alex.
Oh.
Those are the only 2 games that I know of that have a one-handed mode. Callisto doesn't actually have a one-handed mode yet. We're working on getting that making that happen. But it's not as easy as it seems. One of the great examples is these. I mentioned the Jeff level before. In Jeff, there's something that can hear you when you move around, and there are these fungus spores all throughout the level that you have to, while you're doing stuff and solving puzzles, sometimes you have to cover your mouth in order to not cough and alert the bad guy, which is great and is super intense, but how do you do that if you only have one hand? Well, as it turns out, when I opened Hammer for the first time and I was looking through levels, the first level I went to, of course, was Jeff, because it's my favorite level in that. And I started seeing all these gas masks all over the level. All of these gas masks here are all from Jeff. If you played the level, you know that you've only experienced one gas mask there, and it's near the end of the level. You find it basically right before you don't need it anymore. And you're like, oh, if only I'd had this the whole time. So my first thought was, man, they had all these gas masks, and then they took them out before the game was released. Those trolls, how dare they? I thought it was funny. I put a thing on Twitter. I was like, look at this. These guys, I counted 25 gas masks all over Jeff. You guys wanted to make it harder on us, didn't you? One of the level designers for Half-Life Alex messaged me on Twitter like the next day. And he was like, I didn't know if you know this. All these gas masks are for one-handed mode. And I said, what? I had to try this out myself. I booted up Half-Life Alex. I put on one-handed mode in Half-Life Alex, and suddenly the level was populated with gas masks. Not only was it populated with gas masks, other things in the world changed, specifically to focus on people that only had one hand. The way you reload the gun. You hold the gun, you hold it behind your head, you wait 2 seconds, and when you pull it back, the gun is fully loaded and has been cocked. Those kinds of things people don't think about a lot when they're doing development. I am partially deaf in my right ear. I played a game you may have heard of called Into the Radius, kind of like Stalker. One of the things that I got really frustrated with is there's a part in Into the Radius where there are these lightning creatures. The only way that you can find them is by listening. And if you get too close to one, it'll shock you and it'll kill you. Which is great, except that I'm partially deaf in my right ear, so if it was popping in my right ear and I didn't hear it, I was dying over and over again. And I asked, have you guys thought about putting a subtitle? Even a subtitle that pops up and says, lightning crackle, would make me stop, and maybe I could navigate away. Hopefully they're going to do that, but they haven't yet. And many games have that same problem. Lack of subtitles, lack of even basic accessibility. You should anticipate and create for a greater audience. There are some games out there, and this still drives me crazy, that don't have a seated mode. Sometimes we take that for granted because a lot of games have it. Blade and Sorcery doesn't. They're working on it, putting that in there. In Blade and Sorcery, if I wanted to sit down and bash people's head in with an axe, I can't. But what if I don't have a choice but to sit down? Does that mean I can't play Blade and Sorcery? Does that mean that I have to have my Blade and Sorcery character be 5 feet tall? I shouldn't have to. Making sure that you have these kinds of VR things that are not necessary on flat screen gaming is incredibly important as level designers. One thing that you can do, if you're a level designer and you're curious, there's a group called the Able Gamers Foundation. They do 2 things. One, they help set good standards of accessibility for people that are making games. And 2, they help donate accessibility devices to people. There's a guy, and I'm not going to name him by name, is really cool. You may have run into him before. He's in VR chat. He's a furry that does a lot of dancing. He looks like he's got full body. He's really personable. He loves everybody. Really good guy. I had asked him what kind of full body stuff that he uses. And he told me, oh, I don't have full body. I have an Xbox accessibility controller. I'm paralyzed from the chest down. And I was completely shocked. He was puppeting his avatar with one hand. He was puppeting his expressions and stuff with the other hand. He told me I spent 20 years in a hospital bed, and then I've spent the last 2 years doing whatever I want. He gets up in the morning. When he wakes up, he does the stuff that he needs to do in order to be awake in the morning. He puts on his VR headset, and that becomes his life. VR has the opportunity to expand accessibility for people that may have no other life that they could possibly live, and being able to build experiences for them that lets them interact with everything in the world, from going to being looking out at the top of Mount Everest to dancing in a nightclub with friends, is only possible if we as developers take accessibility the steps further that lets those people engage. So this is me once again. This has been really great to talk to you guys. I'm definitely open for taking some questions here for anybody that wants answers to some of the stuff I've touched on here. I would love to talk to you guys, let you pick my brain. I don't even know how much time I've taken here. It feels like it's only been like a half an hour, but I don't know.
No, it's been about 40 minutes, pretty much on the dot. Yeah,
No.
about an hour, 40 minutes.
Nice.
Nice. So I still got like 5 minutes for questions, maybe.
Oh, we
Maybe.
can depending on how long people want to stick around, we can keep it longer for that. But the live stream will have to end in about 5 minutes. So, as far as everybody else, yeah. But anyways, thank you so much. Can we give a round of applause for our guests, everybody?
Yay.
Thank you so much, Sam, for coming out today. That was actually really it was really
Thank you.
good.
Oh yeah.
So basically, at this point, obviously, this is where we're going to have questions. Since it is a little bit over an hour, Kutsu, I think you can pretty much cut the live stream right here, as that's kind of the only time that we have for that kind of thing. As for everyone else, just make sure that we're doing questions in an orderly manner, and keep it to one question, please. Don't have like a question that goes off into another question, because those always end up taking like 30 minutes to answer. So if you do have a question, just keep in mind that other people might have a question too that they want to ask today. So, just keep it like that. So if we have any questions, go ahead and raise your hand.